Okay. Okay, welcome everyone. As people start to trickle in, we just want to welcome you to Local Action Global Accountability, an UNGA High Level Week side event co-organized by Civicus, the Movement for Community-Led Development, NEAR, Peace Direct, and WINGS. We look forward to being on the virtual side of the event with you. Just a few logistics. We do have interpretation in French, Spanish, and American Sign Language available today. You can find that interpretation button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. I'll quickly repeat that in French. Bienvenue à tout le monde. Nous proposons une interprétation en français et en espagnol pour cet événement. Pour accéder à l'interprétation, veuillez cliquer sur le bouton globe qui se trouve en bas de votre écran. Now I'll just ask my colleague Luana to repeat that in Spanish.
Hola. Buenos días, bienvenido todo el mundo y les decimos que tenemos interpretación al español. Para acceder a la interpretación tienen 3 puntitos abajo que dicen más. Ahí van al globo terráqueo que dice interpretación y escuchan la lengua en la que quieren escuchar, en este caso español. Bienvenidos.
Thank you, everyone. We'll just wait a few minutes as they get started in the room. And in the meantime, you should have access to the Q&A function where you can put questions throughout the event. And the panelists in the room will be able to see those questions and answer them during moments of Q&A. Thank you again for being here.
Hello, everyone. Okay, it's working. Hi, everyone. Good morning. We are about to start. Big greetings to colleagues who are online, and thank you very much to all of you for coming here early in your New York morning. Welcome to New York. I'm Mandeep Tivana. I'm Civicus's representative to the UN here in New York. I also wear a second hat as interim incoming co-secretary general, and it's important to mention co-secretary general because my colleague Claire is there, with whom I'll be serving in our leadership transition period while we find a new secretary general. Welcome to this side event, hosted by the Movement for Community-Led Development, NEAR, Wings, Peace Direct, and Civicus. Many thanks to the Ford Foundation for hosting us, and to the Hilton Foundation for really supporting this work and for being a steadfast champion of locally led development. Today's conversation is a follow-up to a commitment made by 15 bilateral agencies a couple of years ago, and which was followed by a commitment by 18 philanthropic organizations to locally led development. To have agency over the decisions that impact our lives is a fundamental human aspiration. And the organizations that have committed to the locally led development agenda want to do this not as an act of charity, but because it's the right thing to do. And ultimately, in the long run, it's going to lead to better and more sustainable outcomes. So today's conversation is really about having a candid dialogue on what's worked, what hasn't worked, and what can we do to improve things and to follow through on this commitment, which is a work in progress. And I now invite Anita from NEAR to take us through the program, and thank you very much, Anita, for your partnership.
Thank you, too. Good morning to those of you in the room here in New York. It's my first event at UNGA this week. I'm very excited, and thank you for spending your time with us this morning. And to those of you online, I believe we have people online. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. As Mandeep said, my name is Anita Kartukuri. I'm with NEAR. I'm the Director of Policy at the Network for Empowered Aid Response. And it is a privilege to be here with you to kick off today's Local Action Global Accountability session. Today's session, I hope, will not be just another conversation. As Mandeep mentioned, this is a moment, a critical moment, to reflect on how far we've come and how much more needs to be done to translate commitments into real, tangible outcomes. The networks and organization co-hosting this event, MCLD, Civicus, Peace Direct, and Wings, and NEAR, we deeply understand that locally led responses save lives and help build sustainable futures. And for global actors to play their part, they must learn from and invest in these proven models. We know that shifting power and resources to local actors isn't just about making aid more efficient. It's about fundamentally transforming how decisions are made and who makes them. And if we want truly sustainable development and resilient communities, we must elevate local leadership across the humanitarian, development, and peace-building sectors. And that requires breaking down the silos that separate these sectors and fully embracing in an integrated, intentional way, local leadership as the key to success. As co-hosts, we have brought together specifically these speakers and you all, you participants, to discuss how we can ensure global commitments become realities across these different sectors together. I encourage you all to think about how your roles, your investments, and your support for local leadership can break down the silos, these silos, which ultimately mean very little to the communities we serve. Today's agenda is structured into two sessions, two key parts. First, we have on the stage already the Power and Practice panel session, which will showcase examples of locally led initiatives, followed by a second session, the Commitments in Action panel, where we'll hear from international actors on how they are delivering on these promises, on their promises. Both sessions will have an opportunity for feedback. We will invite a critical friend to kick off an open Q&A from the audience. Like Mandeep, I encourage you all to engage fully and candidly. We really want to move beyond the rhetoric conversation, that top-line conversation. So let's use this space to ask tough questions of each other, share real solutions, and push each other to do better. With that, I'm delighted to hand over to Benjamin Balaji, Executive Director of Wings, who will guide us through the Power and Practice panel. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm really glad and excited to be here today. I'm the Executive Director of Wings, Benjamin Balaji, and I'm glad to be here with a great panel of leaders from the majority world who will present their initiatives and what is already going on the ground to make that local led development agenda a reality. Just to let you know a bit how it's going to work, so we'll have a discussion here with everyone presenting what they're working on, and then we'll invite a critical friend from the room who is just right here in front of me, Natalie Ross from the Council on Foundations, will challenge us with candid questions and help us go deeper in the conversation. And then we'll have a little moment also at the end to hear your questions and also hear maybe the questions that come from our participants online. And so we're just before we're starting here, I wanted to take a step back and just remind us that indeed the locally led development agenda, especially from a donor's perspective, we should not see it only as an individual strategy. If you're a donor, a foundation, or an agency thinking about how you revise and change your own mechanics and pipes and rules so that more of your resources can get to local actors. Of course, that is critical. That is the starting point. But given the complexity and the scale and the importance of that agenda, it requires also a more collective, a more ambitious approach to that. And that means investing massively in the local civil society infrastructure, in the local civil society ecosystems that are going to make that local development agenda a reality. And that is going to enable others also to channel their resources more effectively on the ground. And so that's something that is possible. And so there is almost like a big ambitious plan to implement right now to help create, networks and advocacy bodies and support and reinforce what is already on the ground, because there's of course so much already existing. And so recognizing those actors and strengthening them so that collectively local civil society and local actors are stronger, in addition to all the individual strategies that we're all working on. So just wanted to make that quick point also a little bit as an introduction to our debate. But as you know, we're here now to get energized by concrete initiatives that are already happening today with this great panel. And so let's dive straight into it and hear from all of them. And so to get us started, we have Sita Supomo, who is the Executive Director of Indonesia for Humanity. And so Sita, you have, sorry, let me just take my note here. Right. Too many papers. All right. So you are going to share with us some insights on the local leadership lab initiative, which has begun to transform policymaking processes to better reflect the needs and visions of grassroots leaders. So please, Sita, over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Benjamin. Hi, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to speak on behalf of 6 Civicus Local Leadership Lab partners in East Africa and Southeast Asia. It is an honor to be part of this crucial conversation. Today, I will share insight on the challenges and strategies we are employing to support civil society in Indonesia, working alongside communities as equal partners so that they can confidently shape their own futures. Before discussing our work in Indonesia, let me briefly introduce the Local Leadership Lab, or LLL. This pilot initiative tackles barriers preventing governments, donors, and stakeholders from supporting diverse local society groups as key development actors. LLL is implemented with support from Civicus Alliance and Hilton Foundation. Another sister initiative called the Localization Lab is led by the NEAR network. LLL centers the political powers of communities, especially those excluded from decision-making. It creates inclusive spaces for dialogues and co-creation at various levels where local civil society groups co-shape policies alongside key actors. 5 elements characterize LLL approach, being locally driven, building power, promoting relational strategies, encouraging innovation and flexibilities, and fostering a collective learning mindset. Indonesia is facing a shrinking civic space with restrictive policies, increased state surveillance, and other forms of restrictions. This pressure undermines social movement and public support. Beyond visible restriction, resourcing, such as funding sustainability, threaten the independence of social movement. Without addressing this issue, their capacity for transformative change will falter. At Indonesia for Humanity, we are strengthening resources for civil justice movement, social justice movement, sorry. We raise and channel resources to support them in challenging environments. Our approach is rooted in mutual trust, solidarity, and community-driven change. Over the past 6 months, we've facilitated 4 dialogues with over 60 organizations, conducted 3 sensing journeys, and identified 7 local resourcing models, all of which help us guiding partner selection across 4 provinces. Collaboration with Fajar, a forum for new resourcing, strengthen connections within local and national dialogues, amplifying community-driven issues within broader alliances. So what have we learned in 6 months with LLL? Building trust, practicing patience, intently observing, and actively listening are essential for amplifying local voices. We've learned that providing spaces for communities to co-create their vision and articulate their demands effectively is critical to closing gaps and fostering collective action. To conclude, I want to offer a reflection and a call on the international donor community to rethink its roles. We know donors in the global north are also grappling with your own social, political, and economic shifts. But this moment calls for more than just adaptation. It demands a fundamental rethinking of how we operate and the roles we play as enablers of change. It is not just about increasing funding. It is about transforming partnership to create equitable and sustainable futures. So let us LLL partners urge you to first invest in institutional strengthening through flexible and predictable funding. Second, intentionally show up as allies by participating in locally led dialogues. Third, ensure accountability by prioritizing local needs and being transparent. Together, we can shift power to communities, fostering a just, inclusive, and world where every community shapes its path forward. In the words of Arundhati Roy, another world is not only possible, she is on her way. On a quiet day, I can hear her breathing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sita, for these inspiring words and very concrete recommendations to the donor community. Our next speaker is McBain Mukandawire, the Executive Director of YouthNet and Counseling, or UNECO, based in Malawi. And so today he's going to share insights from his experience with the Near Change Fund. So it's the Near Change Fund is an emergency funding response model that shifts decision-making power to local actors, showing us how global resources can empower local leadership. So McBain, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Benjamin, and good morning. My name is Macben Mkandaire. I'm the Executive Director of YouthNet and Counseling, an organization based in Malawi, and working on a number of areas, including youth development, women and gender-based violence, child protection, and humanitarian activities in relation to protection. And Yoneko is a member of NIA, has been a member since 2017. And in 2023, Yoneko accessed the NIA Change Fund, which is an emergency response fund that directly responds to the frontline workers immediately if the events happen. You know, when we are talking about responding, the actors tend to have a lot of time designing, planning, and by the time you start going on the ground, then the resources, the emergency is almost gone. So coming back to the Change Fund, it was piloted by NIA since 2022, and Yoneko was one of the actors that received this funding. The basic issue is that it looks at the front issues that come immediately when the emergency have happened. And giving an example of Yoneko, we had cholera, and immediately the country was declared a cholera incident country. Then when it was declared an emergency, immediately the NIA came in to support Yoneko. And one of the things that I want to highlight on this fund is the timeliness of the funding itself. So what you get is that within about 2 weeks, we already had the man on the ground. And that was quite a response, considering that the funding was being mobilized from outside. The second issue that I want to highlight about the fund is looking at the governance aspect. In most cases, we look at the local civil society organizations being accountable to big international donors outside there. But this fund provides for accountability within the local organizations. So the governance structure is within the regions where it is operating in the south, and there are different leaders who are brought together to be able to look at the issues of how to take decisions when the proposals have been submitted, and over a short period of time, there is a big turnaround. The other aspect which I just want to highlight is the issue of flexibility. During the emergency, there are a lot of emerging issues when you are on the ground operating, and that requires a lot of turnaround reaction, which with big bureaucratic systems can be a challenge. But I think in the context that we have been operating, it has been very easy to frag back and say, excuse me, here we have got a challenge and we need to quickly move out and start doing other things. There are a number of things that we are learning from here. One of it is that local aid funding mechanism allows organizations to be able to respond to the issues immediately the emergency occurs, and also that from experience, the solutions that are being generated are context specific. So you are not trying to adapt something that is coming from away to be able to deal with that. By decentralizing the power that is there, we are able to respond to the matters that affect the people on the ground. As a lesson learned, one of the key issues that I want to leave with you is that it would be important for more donors to look into how they are supporting the work, working with local actors, and being able to address the issues that are supposed to address at community level, because they are the ones who are faced with the problem immediately, and then they should be able to respond as soon as they have the funds. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mike Bain, and reminding us how effective and quick his local response. And I mean, myself, I've seen that in different contexts, including in the Philippines after Typhoon Haiyan. I remember going there just a couple of days after Typhoon Haiyan, and it was impressive to see all these local organizations and local foundations distributing support, very organized. And by the time I left there, it was just like 3 or 4 days later. The UN coordination was about to start their assessment of the situation, and so I think it's a great point, and thanks for reminding us that dimension of the discussion. So let's move now to the next speaker. We'll hear from Peter Njuguna, the director of St. John's Community Center in Kenya. And so Peter will share with us an example of how donors can be guided and also held accountable to local actors in reforming their practices using the example of USAID's consultation facilitated by MCLD and Peace Direct. Peter, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Benjamin. Thank you, Benjamin. I'm Peter Njuguna, I'm Director of St. John's Community Center. We are members of the MCLD, Movement for Community-Led Development, which was launched in Kenya in 2019. And from that launch, a lot of discussions started on how to avail local funding to the local organizations, and also how to give an opportunity to the community to be the drivers of their development. And through that, we are 200 members in Kenya, and globally we are over 2,000 members of MCLD. And in partnership between MCLD and Peace Direct, there has been forums that have been organized. In Uganda, we had one forum last month. There's one that is coming soon in Malawi. And as a result of that launch and the discussion between the local organizations and the USAID, sure enough, the next RFA that was released, local organizations were encouraged to apply, and St. John's Community Center is a beneficiary of that initiative, where we've been supported. We've been working with USAID since 2021. And a lot of focus also to support the local organization has been in capacity building, co-creation, working with the different counties, and also the USAID hand-holding us to support our system, to strengthen our systems, and also to build the capacity of our organization, because our organization is a local organization that are getting access to funds from major international donors would be a challenge. But through the initiative by USAID, St. John's Community Center is one of the local partner that is currently implementing the grant. And I can tell you the investment that the USAID has made St. John be a different organization. And this is because of working together and holding us. And we believe with the initiative that has been taking place between MCLD, Peace Direct, and USAID to have dialogue, to discuss areas that require working together. That dialogue, we believe, will yield more results because of what already has been achieved with the localization agenda. So my encouragement going forward would be the partners who are interested in funding localization and local organization, and also local-led development. The need to listen is very critical. Listen to the ground, listen to the community. What are their interests? Listen to the local organizations. What do they need to strengthen their system, to strengthen their resilience, to reach out to the community so that the community can benefit and community can feel that their life have been changed through the funding from the organizations that are supporting their initiative in development. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this testimonial and the importance of listening to the communities. So we're going to hear now from Dr. Rebecca Daly, who is based in Nigeria, and Dr. Rebecca is going to talk to us about this. I think you all have on your tables a copy of this really important document. So as part of MCLD, Rebecca, you've been involved in co-creating that guidance note with hundreds of majority world leaders that offers practical advice on how to organize inclusive and locally led international convenings. Another key dimension of this discussion, we talked about policy, we talked about practice, and now we're going to talk about convenings, and that follows an open letter that was signed by thousands of majority world actors and dozens of international institutions as well. And so it would be great to hear from you now directly what have been some of the key insights out of this process.
Thank you. You have already summarized it all.
My script.
As Benjamin said, I'm from MCLD, CEPI, but then MCLD Nigeria is called SAGDIC. And we are 32 organizations, and we are working mostly in Northeast and North Central Nigeria, where Boko Haram is really infamous, volatile. And I know that everyone who is here in the majority world know how difficult it is to attend this event. I know many of my colleagues, like Pascal from Benin, who's supposed to be here, did not attend. Why? Because the important meeting like that, discussing community-led development, is usually done in America or Europe or Canada, which is very, very difficult to get visa. It is frustrating. And because of this frustration, it led thousands of majority world actors to write an open letter to founders. And this open letter, we have it in 5 languages. Why? Because not every one of us know English or speak in English. So it was a process which MCLD, Civicus, and then Peace Direct, they did the process. And I'm proud to say that founders and convenience, they listened to us, about 33 of them, and including INGO. So we have 5 principles that was laid out. But then some of the organizations, they also asked that, okay, we want to know more, and we are happy that USID informed their mission, but then they asked another question. How should we organize events that will be respectful to the majority world? So this year, these 3 organizations I mentioned before facilitated a co-creation among 300 out of 2,000 majority world. And they came with very wonderful suggestion. And I'm proud to say that I participate along with my some of the Nigeria. So we were on the table, and then they drafted this, and in each of the table, you can see the result of the 300 organizations. And though we local community-led development, we are telling you that if you truly want to support community-led development, you have to hear from the local actors. And so, if you do not hear from the local actors, then everything that you do will not be beneficiary. And how can you hear from them? You have to come to us, or you have to provide easy way to us so that we can participate fully. And when the INGO and the founders said that they want to support community, I believe you that you really want to support community-led development. I also believe that perhaps you have been doing it all wrong because you don't know how to. Through this document, we are providing you with guidance on the technical know-how. And if you are truly serious about community-led development, please implement this. Why? If you implement it, then it will be good. Ensure that we are at the table. Without being there at the table, we will not see the things you prepare for us. Ensure we have access to the table. Without being there, we may be giving leftovers, and best and real food may be eaten by the cooks and then the vendors. Respect our participation. Without respect, we may not enjoy the services you are bringing to us because it may be too far and you may act like a Superman. Speak in our language so that we will understand. If not, we may be scared from you, and anything you bring or any project, we will not use it. Set the agenda with us. If not, we don't know what you are doing, and then we don't know how you plan it. So if you want sustainable development to thrive and to be impacted so that people will benefit, you have to work with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much to you, Dr. Rebecca Dali, for this energizing talk and reminding us that there's a long way between good intentions and reality on the ground. And now it's great that there is this guidance on the topic of international convenings. And I want to ask now Kessie Ekomo Soigné to continue to talk about this question, but already start bridging with the second part of our event on accountability. And so there's a letter that has been signed, now there's guidance, so there's no more mystery on how we make that happen, but it's not yet sure that, as it was just reminded to us, it's really happening now in all these international convenings, the implementation of these recommendations and principles. And so, Kessie, it would be great if you could, as I don't know if I mentioned, you're the founder of Peace and Development Watch from Central African Republic. And it would be great to hear from you how you see the accountability that is necessary to make these commitments and a reality on the ground.
Thank you so much, Benjamin. Accountability, it's a word, when we heard about it most of the time, it's related to the role of the local organization on the field. But it's quite different. It's quite difficult to say it from the other side. And I think here we have something. The last year we see how international community try its best, like to really involve locally led organization in the process. And on the convening part, I see how more and more you can have some local organization around the table. But as you mentioned, Doctor, it's quite difficult. There's a long way to go again. When it's come to accountability linked to the convening dynamic, I think there's this importance to understand that if you decide at the HQ that you want to, to do better, there's a difference when it's come, if you have office on the field, it's quite difficult for them sometimes to understand the importance of where you want to go. So it's important to have them on board, to make them understand, all the advocacy work that we are doing here. You have to make them understand that, because when they are on the field, most of the time they focus on just doing the job. They don't take time to see what difference it makes for you to others here around the table with you. And I think it's something, accountability starts from the HQ maybe, but also you have to have an impact on the field. And as I said, to bring your team with you on the understanding of the process. The other point that I want to mention when it comes to accountability is to challenge also the way you design your work, the way you design, this kind of commitment you are taking right now. Saying that, I mentioned, I go back again, saying that, for instance, we will do our best to have more majority around the table in the US, for instance. It means that you need to have more advocacy work in your own work with your government to facilitate visa, for instance. It means that you have to integrate in the way you work also how, if you were able to make it happen, what the impact, how it changed the work that you do. And accountability is not just we'll do it, but we will prove it and we will keep to improve it. For me, it's something that is quite important. We see it a lot in Central African Republic, for instance, when we see that international organization or international community try to organize something by bringing, a locally led organization around the table. There's something that is missing is that, as you mentioned also, Doctor, I will just keep going on what she said actually, but as she mentioned, the agenda, how can you ensure that your agenda you design really also have an impact on us? Accountability is also that. It's not just impact that you can have on your work, but how it will impact also the work that we do on the field. And it's something that you just can't do alone. You need us. Evaluation is good. Most of the time when we talk about accountability, you will send an expert, you will do the evaluation, check the boxes, and say, yeah, you make it happen. But the reality is that they'll never really ask our point of view. Or what they do is that they will just try to separate like the bad insight that they receive from us. And I think accountability is also to accept that sometimes there's some bad review that is possible to be collected. And you have to take this into account to make it better. And I think, as I said, it's something that we can do together. And it's something that, just take your team with you. Accept sometimes that it's not always good. And it's something that you can use to work on it. And the third thing is also just check, the way to improve your strategy in terms of doing advocacy to bring locally led organization together. Thank you.
Wonderful to hear these very strong points that really remind us that this whole agenda is, as we were saying in the beginning, is going way beyond technical questions, organizational questions. It's really about the change in worldview, in mindset, and then it has to be embraced across organizations and at all levels of organizations on both sides. So thank you so much for that. I'm going to turn on now to our critical friend for this panel, Nathalie Ross, who is the Vice President at the Council on Foundations for Membership Development and Finance. Nathalie, please share with us your questions, and then the panel will answer.
Great. Thank you, everyone. It was lovely to hear all your examples and three words that I heard across all of your responses: trust, transparency, and accountability. And I'm curious if you could talk a little bit more in detail about how you leverage and build feedback loops and communication to build that trust. So how are you listening to and hearing from communities? How are you within your coalitions and networks listening and working with each other? And how are you building those loops for feedback with your funders and donors? And what are some of the things that have worked and maybe what's not working?
Thank you so much, Nathalie, for this excellent question. Is there anyone who would like to go first on that one? Maybe someone that has experienced this. You want to? Yeah. This might be.
It's quite a critical component when you look at trust, accountability, and building relationships. I think one of the fundamental things that we need to talk about is the two-way accountability. The downward accountability, that's the accountability to beneficiaries of the programs who also do question quite a lot. So one of the things that we have within the Change Fund, for example, is that you have to be able to look at how the beneficiaries of the programs become also challenge the accountability of the implementers. So by making sure that they're participating in that process and doing the reviews together, it helps to develop that trust and accountability as a feedback loop. The other component is, of course, upward accountability, but as the people who are implementing the programs who have got the upward accountability to our donors, development partners, and also government, which is very critical when the activities are happening. So, for example, within the Change Fund process, you have a system where you have to also provide information and feedback to the government, and then the donors are also able to assess what is happening. One thing I would say is that sometimes people think that something that is very fast may not have the accountability system built in it. Actually, you build very strong accountability system, feedback loops within the donor. We had sometimes monthly calls, especially at the beginning. It's an emergency, and at the beginning, you do a lot of checks and balances that are happening. So I think there is a way that we can have a very rapid response, but build within that rapid response a component of feedback loop and also following each other to ensure that there is trust and accountability that has to be built at the end of the day.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think we can follow and hear quickly from the three of you.
Thank you. Yeah, we have community forums where we receive feedback from the community on the work that you're doing. There's also the co-creation strategy and initiative where the government comes in and also other partners, local implementing partners. We come together, we discuss the project and also the challenges that are being experienced. With also our partner, USAID, we've had, for example, for St. John's, our mission director visiting us and interacting with the community. And there's always the question, we've managed to host two mission director to ask how the localization is progressing and what would we expect them to do more. And they've always been given feedback by the community themselves because they interact with the community level structure that we work with, and that has helped to give feedback. There also the technical support from the AOR who visits the organization and the project, and they also get feedback because they even go up to household level where they get feedback on what is happening, and they're also able to interact with the local community and the local organization on what needs to be done so that there can be more impact. Thank you.
Rebecca, please.
For MCLD, we have great trust because there is transparency. There is transparency, and we do it together. Everything that we want to implement, it is on the table. No one is left behind. We are holding each other's hand, those in the global MCLD and with chapters, local chapters. So we trust each other, we learn from each other, and if someone is doing something that is funny, our leaders will say, no, this is not how to do it. And also, even in the community, the local community, if we embarked on any project, we empower the people. We tell them that you have the power. We are not here, we did not come here to tell you anything. You have the power. You know your community. You know where it is to set a project. And so the people themselves, they have the power, and they have the trust. And any day that you go now and ask our community, they will tell you, yes, they know what they are doing and they participate in even designing the project. We call them, what do they want, where? So we are doing things with a lot of trust, and this is why I love with MCLD, and this is why we are the technical people in community-led development, with also Peace Direct and other partners. So we are very transparent.
Thank you so much. I'm just want to check quickly on the organizers to see if we're supposed to have a bit of a also exchange with the room. Can we do that? Okay, so I think you wanted to say something, Cassie, but
yeah,
briefly.
Briefly. In the context of Central African Republic, we have an ongoing peace process, and when it's come like to work on the field, we are working based on like the strategy developed by the government in order to bring peace in the country. So when we talk about working with community, out of just focusing on what is happening in the community, we also base our analysis of the situation and the feedback we collect for them based on that national approach. Because this is a vision at the end. At the end, we want peace, coming from the grassroots, but also at the national level. So this is the first thing that we do, is like we focus on the national strategy, and we use our own funding most of the time, rather than to ask for the UN to organize or to pay, for instance, for the meeting. We bring money together coming from different organizations, local organizations, and we ask the UN and international NGOs to come, and based on thematic link that we find in the national strategy, then we ask the population, students, we bring people coming from different areas, and we ask them, what's your point of view, not on what MINUSCA, the UN mission, or what an international NGO is doing, but what do you think about the situation of human rights? And all those organizations mixing together, then they will see if they work together and the work that we do as a local organization is working, like we are achieving the objective that we are going to, we are working all around. So this is how we try our best to get feedbacks, and it's a way for us to contribute to the national, peace process. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have a last very quick response, and then we'll move to one question from the room, because we'll have less than 10 minutes for that.
Okay, thank you. I'll just to add on the donor points, because we are the partner of Civicus. We built trust with LLL Civicus early on in the process, and that is very important, because it set the communication, the relationship very, very well along the process. Now, they share our burden, a communication burden. Theory of change, for instance, is not a sacred word or documents. It can be changed. It is still being changed to make sure that 6 partners have input into the documents. For instance, also we discuss the progress every month, so that we understand the dynamic when the difficulties, challenges, or opportunities that we've seen on the ground. So that way, us, the local partners, the national partners, and the regional partners are all on the same page. And this is very important for us as local partners. It's a show of faith, being accountable, being transparent, and trustworthy. And also, we have the same process with community and the discovery phase, that what we call it. It takes time to build trust. It's not that something we can do, like I meet you over here today and we talk very nicely, and then, okay, we have trust each other. No, it takes time. It takes back and forth process. And for us, 6 months, we are still building it. So it's not something to take lightly. Doing a very deep listening and a deep intention to observe the process. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. So I have the authorization to take one question from the room. So you're going to have be very fast and very visible. So you get to be that person with the one question. We have about 7 minutes left, I think. So, well, now I've actually killed the. Nobody wants to go. All right. No, please go ahead. I'm sure you have lots of questions. Batil, please go ahead.
Not sure it's, oh yeah, it is working. So good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. My name is Patil Misika. I work for the OECD Development Center, in charge of the network of foundations working for development, a close partner of WINGS. I'm gonna turn tables a little bit here because it's been really helpful to hear what your expectations and suggestions are on the frontline side. We have just done a study on flexible funding from philanthropy. And I hate to say that only 5% of grants to date are completely flexible, while there's a lot of research that shows, and we all know, I don't need to convince anyone in this room, that flexible funding empowers grantees, yields better results. So why is that, and what needs to change? So what organizations, what a lot of foundations have said when we interrogated them was, one, their boards don't like to relinquish control. There is a fear of reputational risk. I'm not saying what, I'm bearing no judgment on these arguments, I'm just listing them. Risk aversion, reputational risk. A big problem is also the lack of local presence, which is why this locally led development agenda is so important. So relying on local philanthropy, which is still the exception, foundations internationally with local foundations. They also claim that intermediary organizations make funding more restrictive because they are also bearing a part of the risk. So it's not necessarily on their account. And finally, and this is difficult, they want to lean in and also contribute to developing KPIs that work for them and their entire portfolio. So there is a fine line between being completely detached and wanting to lean in without stifling. So as a result, I think what needs to change is not just the how, it's also the what. We're now at a time where we need to address inequalities multidimensionally. We're organized, governments are organized in silos. Health, climate, gender, nutrition is not a silo. It requires a multidimensional intervention. So the what needs to change for the challenges we have ahead of us, and the how. And as a result, what do we need? Well, we need, I think, to continue to collect data, more and better data, because we need to know how many of these grants are actually flexible. How is the how evolving in this world so that we can keep improving this discussion? And for donors to adhere to principles on locally led development, because this is a tangible commitment, and it's one of the only places, it's one of the only statements where I've seen ODA donors and philanthropy come together forcefully recognizing. And finally, we need to engage boards and senior management into these discussions because modalities will not change until it comes from the cockpit. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for this intervention. I'm just wondering if we should just ask each one of you to just make a quick closing word, a 1 minute statement, call to action, or anything you wanted to say and you didn't have a chance to mention during your intervention, so we can wrap up this conversation, and including reacting to the unrestricted funding question, which of course is a key one to really make locally led development a reality. So shall we do a quick 1 minute round? Let's go. Thank you.
I will be a half a minute round.
Okay.
I just want to underline your whatever you are saying. I mean, all of it. I don't want to repeat, because every item that you mentioned, it's very, very, very important. So I think that's a very good point to start with, and I urge everyone here to also make that research reality. Thank you for that.
Yeah, development will never move if local actors are not part and parcel of the process. and they are not empowered to be able to take their own decisions. Unless we begin to start thinking in the context of ensuring that local actors are empowered and they are given resources that are flexible enough, that are immediate, and that are also helping them to pre-position themselves when it comes to the work of emergency. We will be talking about this thing. I was laughing when he said when he was leaving, that's when assessment was starting. And people are already suffering at that point in time. So I think local actors need just that to ensure that they are empowered and take action at a time that they're supposed to be taking that action. Thank you.
Thank you. For localization to succeed, the element of trust and the element of working together, it is always important to appreciate the strength the local organization, the local community has, and also their weaknesses. That's the only way we'll be able to work together, and trust and letting go would really help in the journey to localization. Because once you trust with the local organization, with the resources, then work together for a journey that you know will succeed, but not a journey that you think will not succeed. So if you start together, co-create together, work together, and listen, as I said earlier, with MSLD initiative to bring the funders and the local communities and the local organization together, able to listen, then work and capitalize on the strength. Thank you.
Mine is to emphasize that really money is going, but those who are giving the money, they are giving it to either some of the government or some who know how to write the proposal. And if they write the proposal, they will eat it themselves. And then the poor people, masses, who those resources supposed to develop them, they will just see maybe twinkle, maybe just. One of my friends wrote $80 million grant to help the poor in Africa. But she told me that 80 million did not reach the African. Those who wrote the proposal, those who are in the office around here, maybe in Washington, I don't know where they live, and all these big, big cars and everything, they eat up. Those poor youth, they did not get a dime. So we have to think to involve local people. They know the people, they know where they are. We are part and parcel of each other. We bore the blunt. My book is coming out just in print now. We bore the blunt. The impact of violence against women and suffering in decades in Nigeria. We bore the blunt, and we know who is suffering and where they are.
So for me, my last point will be like, why are we here? That's the question. I do hope that all of you here, you're here because it's not just for the work, like just to say that you come to work. I do hope that you will go home, you will go back to your office, and you will rethink also the way you are doing things. And at the same time, you will also understand that we are more than just, receiver of funding. We are partner, because the issue we are working on is something that is greater than us, if I can say it like that. And maybe I'm idealistic, I would say, but we need to be idealistic and to challenge ourselves to really achieve the agenda, that we are pushing together. So thank you.
Thank you. I think they deserve a big round of applause. Thank you so much. It was incredibly inspiring, and that gives us hope to see that the time when communities and grassroots leaders had to listen to the guidance from others now is switching to a time when they are actually giving guidance to all of us in this space. And so it's very inspiring to hear all these initiatives and encouraging to see it's actually happening, and we just now need to accelerate that and support that. So thank you so much. And with this, I'm going to hand over to Gunjat Veda, who is the Global Secretary of MCLD, who is going to start us with an exercise on accountability. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Benjamin. And thank you everyone for that very inspiring, panel discussion. As Benjamin said, I am Gunjan Veda. I am the Global Secretary of the Movement for Community-Led Development, and we are very honored to be co-hosting this. We've been talking a lot, we heard from the panel here. Natalie, you said there were 3 words that stood out: trust, transparency, and accountability. As Anita and Mandeep said in the morning, the reason we are all here today really is because all of us believe in the power of local leadership, right? And the last few years, we've seen commitments after commitments to this effect. And yet, at least in the majority world, we don't really know what has happened once those commitments have been made. What differences have been made, because we haven't really experienced those differences. So a huge part of it today, what we want to do is to try and understand what is it that has been happening. We also believe, as the panelists said, McGwen talked about mutual accountability, two-way accountability. So we believe that each one of us is important and necessary to make locally led development a reality. So we're going to do a short exercise that involves every one of us, both online and people who are in this room, right? What we're going to do is that there are post-it notes on every table. I'm going to first talk about the room and then online. There are post-it notes on every table. Please take 3 post-it notes. On the first post-it note, we are talking about the one thing your organization has done to support locally led action, okay? So one thing that your organization has done very concretely to support locally led action. On the second post-it note, you're writing the one thing you hope your counterparts will do to support locally led action. So what does this mean? If you're a majority world actor, what is the one thing you want funders or INGOs to do? If you're a funder, what is the one thing you want majority world actors or INGOs to do? If you're an INGO, what is the one thing you want funders or majority world actors to do, right? So that's the second question. And the third question, the third thing you're writing on the post-it note is, we talked about accountability, which is so important, as Cassie stressed again and again. So what is the one action that either you or actually people in this room can take to ensure accountability to the locally led commitments? How do we actually share this information and ensure there is accountability? So 3 post-it notes. 1, what your organization has done. 2, what you would like to see your counterparts do. And 3, an accountability measure that can actually be taken, right? You will see in the room, there are 3 flip charts. You can, once you are done, we'll also have a little bit of movement to refocus our attention. So once you are done writing, please go to the boards, flip charts, and post your post-it notes on them. We hope every one of us will hold ourselves accountable to doing this exercise here. For the online participants, there is a mural board, and I know in the online section, they are going to be sharing instructions around it. And while we do that, I am going to request the panels to transition. Thank you. Oh, yes. And you have about 5 minutes to put the things on the post-its and put the post-its on the flip charts. Yes, please. Yes, please. You are here. Yes, after you put it, you're here. Right. Oh, sorry. I am so sorry. I confused. You're from UNWPS, right? Yes. I'm sorry.
Si alguien, buenos días, si alguien necesita ayuda para usar la aplicación, nos pueden escribir en el chat.
Has had the chance to put their post-it notes. If we can all please be seated, we will begin with our next panel. I'm going to give everyone 30 seconds to just get back to their seats. Okay, let's get seated, please, so that we can begin the panel and we actually have question and answer time. So also, as you listen to the panelists, please collect your questions because we will do a Q&A at the end. So keep your questions ready. So the morning we talked about some of the local majority world initiatives in support of locally led development. We are now transitioning to talk a little bit about the commitments that have already been made by the funders on locally led development and into action and accountability on those commitments. MacBen raised a very important point in the last session about two-way accountability, or what we call mutual accountability, because often when we talk of locally led development and accountability to it, the question is accountability to whom? Because the reality is, we all know, right, as bilateral agencies, you are accountable to the taxpayers in the countries you are in. We know that as foundations or INGOs, there are boards you have to be accountable to. So those are realities. But the reality is also that when we make a commitment and we take decisions that affect the lives of millions of people all across the world, of local organizations, and we heard about them, there is an accountability that we owe to those people, to the communities and the local organizations. And it is in that spirit that we are getting into this panel on local, on accountability. So I have with me today 6 wonderful women. We are an all-women panel, in case you didn't notice. So I have with me Elizabeth Spehar, who is the Assistant Secretary General of the UN PBSO, Peace Building Support Office. Next to Elizabeth is Kimberly Bayer. She is the Deputy Vice President for International Programs at the Ford Foundation. Then we have Shaheen Kasim Lakha. Shaheen is the Senior Director for Strategic Partnerships at the Conrad and Hilton Foundation. We have Birgitta Markussen, Director of the Department of Humanitarian Affairs, Civil Society and Engagement at the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Excuse me. Then we have Tara Sumro, who is the ECOSOC Ambassador to the UK mission to the UN. And next to me is Sarah Rose, who is the Senior Advisor on Localization to the Administrator of USAID. What we're going to do is we are going to have a quick, I'm going to use my privilege as a moderator. It's always a fun thing to do, right, Pavel? To ask a couple of quick questions around accountability to the panel. Then we will go to the critical friend and come back to the audience questions. Your responses are very important. And at the end, Wahe will actually be bringing those in back to the room to say, what is it that we have been thinking about on accountability? So we will come back to the room. But for now, we're going to start with the panel. And Sarah, I'm going to start with you because in 2021, USAID made a very public commitment on locally led development. And one of the pillars of that was also to support and to mobilize other agencies, to the locally led development commitment. You are also one of the few agencies that has actually made a public report on what you're doing. So tell us a little bit about this journey, the challenges in actually exercising that accountability on locally led development.
Thank you so much. I just want to first thank all of the organizers for having this session today. It is so important to make sure that we have time to get together to talk about these issues. I also really want to thank the prior panel as well for really sharing their experiences. And also, if I may build on the quote that Sita shared, how they envision and how they are shaping, this world, this new world, right, that we see coming as well. So as Gunjan pointed out, USAID has made a commitment to locally led development and humanitarian assistance a core part of its reform agenda. And we have made those commitments both through endorsing the donor statement on locally led development that Mandeep highlighted in his introductory remarks, as well as in making our own commitments. And as Gunjan pointed out, what's been important to us is to make sure that we are transparent about what we are doing towards those commitments, how we are doing on those commitments, and to make sure that we can share that with others as well. Because a lot of the steps that we have been taking over the last couple of years to really seek to underpin progress toward those commitments that we have made, to shift more funding and to shift more decision-making power to the local change makers that are really driving that impact in their countries and communities, that needs to build upon what they need from us as well. And so that's where we are, and we want to make sure that we can continue this conversation. And a number of the things that we've been doing over the last couple of years is thinking about how can we set our policy framework to really articulate what is the vision and how should we operationalize these approaches when we're talking about locally led development and humanitarian assistance. I'm really proud to say that just recently we've made updates to how we do policies at USAID to make clear that we have to have local input, local engagement, local feedback in the policy development process, so we can make sure that as we continue to develop policies that will have bearing on locally led development, that we are hearing from those local voices on what that needs to look like, right? We are reducing barriers. Let me just take one more thing. We are reducing barriers to partnership with USAID too, and those efforts really reflect what we have heard from our partners and what we have heard from people who are not yet partnering with USAID on what that needs to look like and how we can work better in more locally led ways across the board as well. So let me just stop there.
Thank you. Tara, the UK government has also been one of the signatories to the donor statement on locally led development. So tell us a little bit about what actions have been taken to actually operationalize them.
Sure, thank you. So, I mean, like Sarah, I'd like to say that so far, and I think listening to the panel has been really, really illuminating and is a really good reminder for why this is such an important agenda, I think, and the variety of issues that this covers. So I guess first, the UK has signed up to this commitment, and we are continuing to work with donors to look at what more we need to do across development and humanitarian issues. So how do we make sure that we are incorporating and working more closely with civil society, and that our funding is channeled increasingly through civil society? Part of what we do is around models. So what models do we utilize to disseminate that assistance? So Syria is one example where we've got a multi-donor trust fund working with civil society, which has civil society on the board of that fund as well. So it's how is civil society not just recipients of assistance, but involved in deciding how that assistance is determined and where it goes to and who it goes to. I think the sort of sustainability and capability, which we heard from the panel as well, about the importance of donors working with civil society organizations to strengthen that capacity and to ensure that funding doesn't just go to those who are most able to write the business cases and proposals. That's not the idea, that's not the aim, and that's not the best way to spend the money, I think. So we are very much investing in that, working with Comic Relief in the UK to do that. Some specific examples are in Ghana, Malawi, and Zambia, where we're working with civil society to build that capacity. And then I think the sort of accountability point, so transparency and accountability on the commitments that we make is really, really important for the UK. It is taxpayers' money. We need to make sure that we are honoring the commitments that we make and demonstrating that we believe in those commitments. That means, we're streamlining how we deliver our programs. We know that bureaucracy and red tape when it comes to donor funding is a real problem. And so we are trying to address this and help manage that while balancing the risks that, again, the panel pointed out, and I think came up in the sort of critical friend comment. How do we manage those risks as against the commitments that we're making to civil society? Devolving program delivery, so having our teams out in countries where we are spending money is really important. We don't try and do all of this from the UK. It's just not possible. It's not the best way for us to manage those risks, and it means we don't know the partners that we should be working with. So making sure we have the right teams in country and that they are empowered. Streamlining due diligence and considering barriers to funding. So what are the issues that prevent civil society from accessing our funding? And I think listening. So we heard from the panel just how important listening is. So, listening on the ground to how do we improve the way that we deliver assistance is absolutely critical. And I guess just the last point I'd like to make is around the fact that working with civil society and channeling funding through civil society in and of itself doesn't mean that our assistance is more inclusive or that it's reaching the most vulnerable. So I think what's important for us is making sure that those who are marginalized, those voices that don't always get heard, even through civil society mechanisms, that we are reaching those as well. So I think that's just a good point for us to challenge ourselves on as well.
Thank you, Tara. Birgitte, I think you know what my question is. It's similar, that because the Danish MFA has also signed on to the donor statement. Again, what concrete actions, and I'll ask everyone to limit it to a couple of points so that we can do a quick round, have you taken to make it a reality?
Thank you very much. I hope this will come on as I start speaking.
Yeah, I think it is.
It's on, right. Okay, no, thanks a lot. And I am also very happy to be here, very honored to be in this all-female panel. And thank you very much from the first panel that we listened to, because I think that was really great. And this one, thank you to sharing this one with us, and I took especially note of nothing about us without us. So thanks a lot for that. I'm going to share 3 points with you on what we've done. First one is is very general in terms of what we do constantly. Of course, we signed up to the statement on supporting locally led development into practice. So we participate in meetings like this. We participate in meetings and in thinking within the institution, the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, to see what can we do in order to implement these commitments. So that's a constant work. The second one, I'm going to be very concrete. We've got 4 key asks that we put up. And the first, and this is actually to work with local leadership as a cross-cutting issue in what we do. So the first one is to our strategic partners that we call civil society organizations and also UN organizations. But what to our Danish strategic partners, what we do is that we want to have a report actually every year of their strategy for local leadership in the work that they are doing. So that's one thing, and I think that's quite important. Second one is that we actually aim to, and 80–90% of our funding is flexible funding, or what we call quality funding. So that creates the flexibility. For instance, we see in many crisis situations, as we're also covering humanitarian issues, many of the Danish, if it's being Danish Red Cross, others, they then report to us, now we have flexed money into that situation. So they just need to tell us what they've done. It's a certain percentage of that, but it's quite a flexible model. The third one, and this is a painful one for some of our partners, is that we ask only to spend 20% of the funding at headquarters level and 80% in the field. That has made, maybe among the four initiatives, has actually made a major impact on the way that Danish civil society organizations have started to work. And it has transformed the way they work. The last thing that we've done is really also to have accountability measures in country, to have dialogues and to follow up. So those were four principles that are guiding us that we've done. Last of my 3 points is really, we will really stand up and be committed to this. And you know, for instance, we're taking up a seat in the Security Council next year, and we already started to have the discussions. How can we actually involve civil society in this? Later on today, I'm going to participate in a discussion with Unmute, where you have 60 countries signing up to unmute civil society in dialogues with the UN. I'll stop there, but thanks again for the invitation today.
Thank you. Shaheen, the Hilton Foundation was one of the first set of foundations who signed the donor statement, right? Again, can you speak very concretely to some actions that have been taken to, translate that intention into practice?
Yes, good morning.
Yes, it comes on when you...
automatically, okay. Yes, great to be part of this panel and to follow a really powerful panel earlier on. So we were one of the first to sign up. We drew great inspiration from all the letters that civil society had written, but also, quite frankly, from one of the world's largest donors signing up with such a lofty ambition. And that's a challenge, so we thought we'll rise to the challenge. So I'll just go through the steps that we undertook. One is a values alignment piece. Where were our own values in support of, or actually just fundamentally the same? So things like dignity, respect, and humility, learning from where the expertise really lies. When that's in place, you can engage management and governance, because then it doesn't feel like it's really out of place, right? So once they were on board, it became a whole of organization endeavor. So it's not just from which programs are we funding and how each program initiative is funding and its commitments. We took on, the first exercise is how much of our money is actually going direct to local. So that was an internal audit exercise, so that we could make a 25% commitment as well. So our baseline was around 13%, like everybody else that we have data on. And today I'm really pleased to report that we're closer to 40%. But it meant you have to measure what you do and make a goal as a target. The other thing we had to look at was our own processes and compliance. So we had to engage our grants management, general counsel, making sure that we're in compliance. We had to look at communications. How are we talking about this work? How do we talk about our work? What are the implicit and explicit biases in it? So there was a lot of unpacking there, and narrative change became part of what we do. And the next thing was to look at new tools. We clearly would love to be everywhere in every country, with every local organization. We can't. So what are the new tools for good donorship? Or what are good practices for the intermediaries or re-granters that we're funding? How do we think about that? And then the last thing is, well, two last things. We can't do it together. I mean, we can't do it alone. It has to be done together, so partnerships. and then measuring what we do. So we're really committed to our own internal measurements as well. So those are all the steps.
Thank you, Shaheen. Kim, again, Ford was one of the early signatories to the donor statement. If you can also share some of the concrete, again, couple of very concrete actions that have actually been taken.
Sure, thank you, and a belated warm welcome to everyone to the Foundation. We're thrilled to host everyone today, and really thank you for having me here and continuing to call for accountability and attention to this issue. So first, I'd like to start just by sharing the way the Foundation is structured, because that really helps us meet some of the goals of the donor statement. We have 10 offices throughout the Global South. These offices are led by staff of the region, and they almost exclusively grant to locally led groups. And the importance of proximity, I think, is key here. But I want to also just add 2 specific examples in terms of actions we've taken in the past few years. And the first is a significant policy change, right, that we've made to move towards long-term flexible funding. And I'm really glad that has come up very clearly in the previous conversation as well as this conversation, because I think it's a super important component of this. Really, we had to end the cycle, right, of project-based grant making that essentially contributes to starving NGOs, fundraising from project to project, unable to pay for the real costs of operations. So I will share the proportion of our grant making that was made in the form of general or unrestricted support has gone from 36% in 2016 to 81% in the last grant-making year in 2023. And this was a huge policy shift with the support of our board, a full-on organizational shift. And we're also trying to really work to influence other funders to move in this direction, because as we've heard, this is key, the trust, the ability to respond quickly to emergencies, to invest in things that organizations feel is important, we feel is the key to long-term change. And the second example is of a specific investment that we recently made that I think exemplifies progress towards some of the principles in the donor statement. And this is the implementation of the 1.7 billion with a B Indigenous Peoples and Local Community Pledge from COP26 in Glasgow a few years ago. And the pledge committed funds towards land tenure and forest guardianship of Indigenous peoples and local communities, which has been a proven way to fight climate change. One of the significant aspects of that COP in Glasgow was also to have Indigenous people and local communities at the table for the first time in a long time. So Ford committed $100 million to that pledge over 5 years. But more importantly, we've been tracking the share of grant making that's going directly to Indigenous peoples and local community organizations. So this year's report, which will be released at the next COP, we've committed over half of our pledge directly to these organizations. Also equally as important, in response to our partners, we've committed to an open, transparent process of annual reporting on the pledge. And we've translated this annual report to multiple languages. So I think this pledge and the way it was implemented could be a model for other aspects. And there's been multiple community funds that have been developed in Indonesia, the Nusantara Fund, developed by Indigenous peoples and local communities to accept this funding and really develop that infrastructure, also came out. And then one final point that came out of the pledge is really bringing more attention to this work, but increasing funding to these communities. We've been tracking, latest reports indicates that funding has increased, direct funding has increased by 36% to these communities since the pledge. So a real tangible output there. Thank you,
Kim. Elizabeth, the UNPBSO is slightly different in that you're not a signatory. No multilateral agency is actually a signatory to the donor statement. However, you have prioritized local action and locally led action in your work. Would you like to share a little bit about, how you've been prioritizing locally led action in the work of the UNPBSL?
Okay. No, thank you so much. I'm also thrilled to be here. It's such an important conversation. I missed a little bit at the beginning, but what I did here was very inspiring, and I learned quite a bit from the first panel. Yeah, indeed, I do represent a bit of a different beast. So the Peacebuilding Support Office that I represent is part of the UN Secretariat, and our main mission is to support member states to build and sustain peace. And when we talk about building and sustaining peace, we're talking about not just dealing with the symptoms of conflict. Violence, destruction, loss of life, extremely important, but also to tackle the root causes. And as a result, we take very seriously the mission, if you will, to help bring the entire UN system around a comprehensive approach. And we did hear from one of the participants here about the problem of a siloed approach, right, to local development, to local action. Well, we feel that we're constantly struggling in the UN with a potential siloed approach when it comes to building and sustaining peace. We say a lot that, there's no sustainable peace without sustainable development. There's no sustainable development without sustainable peace. And we've made great strides, but there's still a ways to go. So our office, I feel, plays an important role in all of that. I won't go into the details too much, but we have three main axes, if you will, of our work. We serve as a kind of secretariat for the Peacebuilding Commission, which is an intergovernmental body that advises the Security Council. They have quite regular civil society participation, and we hope that we can help them to enhance that and make it more meaningful. We also have an area of partnerships where we're trying to partner increasingly with civil society organizations at all levels, with IFIs to make sure that the money that they invest in countries is peace positive and aligns with the priorities of the country and aligns also with UN actions, private sector, bringing the private sector in. And then finally, we manage the Secretary General's Peacebuilding Fund, which funds peacebuilding activity around the world, and it's that mechanism through which we fund locally led initiatives. Now, I have to say that as a secretariat fund and the way we're set up, one of our principal goals with this fund is to help bring the UN system itself together and drive a more strategic agenda and approach. So a lot of the resources of the fund don't go directly to local organizations. Much of it goes through the UN agencies' funds and programs. But I can tell you that we have been shifting over the years, and an ever larger percentage is going to local CSOs, including grassroots CSOs. Some of the things we've done very quickly, because I'm sure I'm running out of time, is we did a study in 2022 basically taking a look at how we've been doing on local peace building so that we could get lessons learned for our own action going forward, but also for others who are in a similar position of supporting locally led peace building. We're trying to implement those as we go. We have been moving towards co-creation of initiatives on the ground through our partners, joint evaluation, and trying to get money directly, particularly to women's organizations, women's-led youth. So the point on who you are actually targeting, both strengthening their capacity, giving them resources to work with. And finally, I would like to mention our CSO UN dialogue, which we launched last year in December. We want it to remain an annual event, which is co-created between ourselves and various CSOs. The idea is that on the one hand, it gives access to CSOs, including locally led ones, to the UN decision-making, policy-making, but also it's a network for them, and we hope that we can use it as a platform going forward for what we've up until now called South-South triangular cooperation. Maybe we need to change that to majority world triangular cooperation. I'm still wrapping my head around that one. It's new for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you, everyone. We actually went over time on what we had. So what we're going to do is for the second round, we're going to be very strict and make it to 1-minute responses, because what we do want to do is we do want to be able to take questions from the room, right? And the critical friend intervention. So I'm going to, and it's pretty much almost the same question for everybody, except you and PBS, so when I will come to you. So, you've all talked about individually the actions you've taken. And I know people in the rooms, some of them perhaps know of some of the actions, otherwise we don't get to know, right? A huge part of accountability is transparency, as we heard from the previous panel, and knowing what is happening. Why has it been so difficult to get some kind of an accountability mechanism on the donor statement? And is there anything that can be done, anything very concrete in terms of getting it done, right? 1 minute each, I would encourage you to build off each other's instead of repeating the same points. And Sarah, we'll start with you. So you started this with NORAD.
I'm going to take your 1 minute challenge and use that to hopefully not talk too fast because I do have a tendency to do so. Let me just say that I think the donor statement provides, an important locus for this continued conversation. Witness this conversation we're having today and a number of other conversations, over the next few days as well. Bilateral aid agencies met together in November on the heels of the DAC meeting to talk about their commitments again. So I think this continued peer learning conversation is important. Ultimately, it's really incumbent upon each endorser to figure out how they hold themselves to account for these commitments. The 3 commitments of the donor statement were really intentionally broad, recognizing that every funder has their own funding model, approaches, constraints, opportunities. And so that allows flexibility in approach, and it will have to allow flexibility in sort of that accountability as well. But let me just quickly, before I close, flag some really exciting things that are happening right now with the DAC as well, the OECD DAC. They have had a locally led development work stream that they are just wrapping up. And later today, or maybe now, I haven't seen it yet, they are releasing their final report on that learning effort of the locally led development work stream. And part of that is going to share, peer learning, but it will also share some findings about, potentially exploring some official guidance, maybe to include metrics about how we measure locally led development sort of across bilateral funders. And I know they've had a lot of public engagement as well on what that could look like and what that should look like. And so I think that is an important effort that we can build on as well.
Thank you.
So I think building on what Sarah has said, part of the challenge is around the fact that bilateral aid agencies and foundations will all have slightly different ways that we report. And I think being able to do that collectively is difficult. We all, those of us who've signed up to the pledge, we are committed to being public and transparent about it. And I think we have to be held to account, and that's certainly what the UK does. I just wanted to say quickly on the back of Elizabeth's comments about the role of the UN, one of the things that the UK has been very keen to do working with other donors is making sure civil society has a voice at the UN and in UN conferences, in UN decision making. And we've been very much at the forefront of trying to champion that. And that it is difficult. It's not straightforward. It's not easy, but it's a very important part of how we incorporate the voice of civil society in decisions that are being taken today.
Thank you. Birgitta?
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, what is actually at stake? So our experience is very much related to, I think was mentioned also in the introductions of today's discussions, is who we are accountable to. And of course, this is a major change in mindsets, also being accountable, and we should be accountable to where we want to see results and where we want to work with local leadership and organizations. But we also have an accountability, we as a Danish ministry, to the parliament. And there, my second point is that it's very much also related to the situations on the ground. We all know there are some situations whereby I'm very impressed working in the Boko Haram area, for instance, that we heard Rebecca is. Of course, there are risks at play here. And when you step into local context where you have crisis, of course, Gaza's situation have really been the major test, I think, for many of these accountability measures, because we are asked questions from our parliaments on how can you, for instance, say that the Danish funds have not been funding organizations that were involved in the 7 October attack. So these are some, I'm just saying this is just to put, but I think the major thing here is really to make the argument for the local leadership and say we need to have some risk sharing, and that just takes a change of mindset. Thank you.
So risk sharing, and also back to the question of trust, and that takes time. and we're all operating on different timelines. So I think, how do we build that into what we're doing? I'd like to go to the issue of evidence and outcomes. Whose data, who's creating the metrics? How do we think about that? What are the methodologies of collection? So all those have tended to be dominated by funders. And so rethinking that. I'd also like to point out that we're part of several initiatives that are joint initiatives with other foundations through networks like the one sitting right opposite me, the Council on Foundations, Wings, Philea. Each of these is creating a community of practice to look at this, to see how do we make these processes more transparent. But I will say we're talking about massive transformation, which means unlearning, which takes time. So just like you all ask to be given more time, I think we need a little bit of time to think through that as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, building on that point, and a lot of what others have said is, we all obviously are measuring things differently. I think we could use advice on that too. Even internally at Ford, we're having a debate about what does this mean. We've been measuring it in terms of just the location of the grantee, but it's much more nuanced and complex than that. So we're not quite sure how to report these numbers. If you report it in that way, we're close to 50% of our international funding, but we also have to think about the complex environments that organizations are operating in. Maybe you're funding a Global South network where all its members are in the Global South. It's accountable to and has very progressive policies in place and follows the ethos of locally led development, but it had to register in a Global North country for compliance or regulation purposes. Do we count that? So those are kind of the nuances that I think we need to account for in this debate, not just the bottom line number, but all of the kind of nuance and complexities that this work takes.
Thank you. Elizabeth, finally for you, how do we bring the UN system and the UN agencies to think more deeply about locally led development and to actually take action on it?
Yeah, well, that's exactly one of the things that we try to do. And I think that, for example, inviting them to fora like this are very useful. I think that we all have a lot of learning that we need to do. I think the intention is there, and we've heard it from all of the panelists, right? I mean, we all understand how incredibly important this is, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because, as the cliche goes, it is a smart thing to do. I mean, if you really want to move, in our case, towards sustainable peace in a country, you have got to look at what's happening at local level, and it's only the local level actors that know best what is going on and can help us all to orient what should be done. We need to help them, to give them agency, and so forth. But the UN system suffers from a number of the things that have been mentioned here. Accountability. They are accountable to their donors. And so they are beholden to the rules that are made also by those who fund the various agencies, funds, and programs. I was just in a meeting yesterday where we were talking about the rather dire funding situation, and I'm sure this is not something that's alien to anyone in this room. And it was pointed out that in terms of the funding that the UN system gets to do development, to do humanitarian, to do peace work, is extremely highly tied and earmarked. There's a very little, a very, very small amount that is not earmarked. It makes the UN system often very projectized, which I certainly don't think is a good approach. And it also drives the silos. So at the same time as we're saying we have to come together as one UN, we need to work across the famous humanitarian development and peace nexus with the human rights lens. I feel that with a lot of donors cutting back right now, their contributions, it's driving more competition within the system. So I think we need to talk about it. We need to find ways to work together. First of all, within the UN system, we need to talk to our donors about also giving us more flexibility so that we can be more flexible on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now we are going to move to Michael Sodipo from the Peace Initiative Network in Nigeria, who will be our critical friend for this panel. Michael.
Okay. Thank you so much for sharing and for your deep insight. I want to thank you for what you do to make our world better. My question is two, and I want you. I know you must have said something about what I want to talk about. Maybe to take a deeper dive. The first question is: donors are often accountable to board of directors, to taxpayers, to family trust. How are you doing? What are you doing to balance the commitment to locally led agenda and the other? That's one. And two, I want to also look at issue of coordination among donors, breaking silos, because it seems everybody working in silos. So what are you doing to bring working together and to see how there will be better coordinations for more result and impact?
Thank you so much, Michael. So two very important questions, one around coordination and the other really around balancing the needs of your boards and the groups that you are technically accountable to the need to be accountable to. Who wants to go? And again, I will request you to keep responses short. Shara?
So I'll take the first point first around how do we balance our responsibilities around accountability versus sort of risk and how do we make sure that we're able to get money where it needs to go. Fundamentally, I think there is risk across any mechanism of spending money on development or humanitarian assistance, whether it's through the UN, whether it's through civil society. There's risk across the board, and we have to accept that if we want to help reach those who need the assistance. So on the one hand, I sort of think we're constantly having to think about how to balance risk. And also, there has to be awareness amongst, our ministers and, the government from the UK side that does want to spend this money and has identified priorities for these areas as against how do we meet those beneficiaries and meet the needs. So that risk conversation is one that we're constantly having, and to some degree, I think that it is there, whether we're talking about working with civil society or whether we're talking about working with larger organizations, and that is just something that we have to work through. The other point about working together as donors, I mean, in a sense, you're seeing part of that here, and I think you're hearing a very consistent message from the panel here. I think, what we have signed up to on our commitments that we've already made, commitments that we're continuing to make, I think is a demonstration of the fact that as donors, we see this as an important agenda. I think, there are other large donors also who aren't necessarily part of this and who we need to broaden that community out to. So for me, that's an important part of this. And I think the metrics piece and how do we collectively measure in a way that is consistent is really important, because the problem is if we're measuring differently, we can't hold each other as donors to account.
So I would say, I think, in some ways we're at an interesting place right now on this question, in that there doesn't have to necessarily be a trade-off between accountability to external stakeholders, that are based, in our own country and the locally led development agenda. We see really growing consensus that locally led development and humanitarian assistance is the way that you need to do things in order to be more effective, in order to think about how you're having locally rooted, owned, and sustained results as well. And I think that this is an opportunity, right? I mean, and one thing that that we can point to too, in the United States, there was a bill that has been introduced, I'll just say introduced, in Congress that really gets at pushing USAID to do more locally led development and humanitarian assistance, and it's had bipartisan support too. We are asked for. People are keen to see the reports that we put out on our progress, on how we're doing this. People are keen to see how we're doing more of this, and we report back to them as well in terms of our stakeholders. And I think a lot of times, again, that's just recognition that it's important for effectiveness. It's important for use of taxpayer funding to make sure that when we are spending our money, we are doing so in ways that make the most sense for the ground, for the place that we're operating as well.
Gita?
Thank you very much. Good questions. First one, how do we balance and continue to balance the issues related to local leadership? We are at the moment, as you were also saying, there is a crunch time at the moment, and you just keep pushing this and putting this issue on the agenda. For instance, right now there are a lot of discussions in humanitarian sector because of what was the issues of the financing crisis. Actually, you have a situation where if you look at humanitarian financing, you have a number of humanitarian situation rising, whereas the funding is basically also is going down. But that is triggering a very good discussion of the nature and of the drivers and the root causes of humanitarian crisis, where you say, how do we do programming? How do we do support to these protracted crises that have been going on for decades? Are they, so there is a good discussion there in terms of getting the balance and the local leadership, and I see local leadership actually being quite important in this new type of programming. Secondly, I just think we need, this is a bit, we have a constant dialogue with our partners in terms of how we break the silos, as you said, because lives, we know, they're not lived in silos. So we know, and we have to have that constant dialogue. One of the tools that we have every year, we're just going into a month of annual consultations with our partners to exactly discuss some of these and to get the feedback. Thank you.
Thanks. So I'm going to go to Elizabeth and then Shaheen. I'll ask you both to keep it short. And then we will take 2 questions from the room together with 1 from online and have the panel finish off with those. Yeah? Okay.
Okay, again, I'm a little bit a beast of a different shade, but we also feel very accountable to the taxpayers of our member states, because the resources for the SG's Peacebuilding Fund come from member states. Up until pretty soon, voluntary donations to the fund. But as of January 2025, we're supposed to get assessed contributions from all 193 member states. So that is something to take into account. So when I go to the capitals of our member states, I try to meet with the parliaments. And what we need to do there, as several have said already, is to explain why it's so important to fund these local level efforts and what is the impact. I just want to add another point really quickly, and that is, in terms of accountability, that's the issue of national ownership. So we always say that UN peacebuilding is predicated on national ownership. What many member states understand by national ownership is government ownership. We like to see it as inclusive national ownership, which means the ownership by civil society and the state. But any project or initiative that the SG's fund funds has to be signed off by the government. So we also need to do, through our resident coordinators on the ground, usually a kind of discussion, negotiation, and come to an agreement also with government when we're funding local CSOs. And sometimes in some contexts, it can be very tricky, but we very much believe in doing that. But I also think it's extremely important, because some of the feedback I get from our member states, beneficiaries, if you will, is, organizations, INGOs, other types of entities, well-meaning, sweep into our country, directly fund institutions. We have no clue who they are. We don't know what they're doing. We don't know how legitimate they are, and so forth. And I think there is that balance between, of course, not government control of local civil society, but they need to be aware, they need to sign off, at least in terms of the way that we work. Thank you.
Shaheen?
See.
Okay, perfect, thank you. Are there questions in the room? Louis? And then, so please keep your questions short.
Sure. First of all, thank you so much for sharing. And I think, it's very enlightening. I have several questions. I have to prioritize. First of all, I would like to know, there are a lot of good practices and knowledge and know-how that you are building and you are bringing to the room. So how can we expand these good practices with other donors? How can we make sure that other donors are following the same path? And I'm grateful that Kimberly mentioned about the role of Ford Foundation influencing other partners, but what other organizations are doing to do that? And what are the gap of communication or what do you see like the gap of communication and trust between donors and local actors? And I'm assuming already that I'm a local actor and we are already partners. So what can we do? What we as local partners, what can we do to support so you can overcome the challenges you are facing? Thank you.
Okay. Do you want to say your name?
Oh, sorry. I'm Luis from Venezuela. Well, originally from Venezuela. I'm currently, since 6 weeks ago, on a person on the move.
Thank you.
Okay. Hi, I'm Alvina Quason. I'm the CEO for a diaspora humanitarian organization called Shabaka. And I have two quick questions. The first is to Tara. I was pleased to hear that the UK is supporting civil society presence and wishing to advance that. I'd be very interested to hear how they're doing that in terms of the support, who's being selected, and what resource support they get. And equally, I was very happy to hear about the core funding that Ford Foundation is providing. At the moment, it's great that we're talking about locally led organizations. Many of them are struggling because they do not receive core funding, and so they're finding it very difficult to be sustainable. And so I'd love to hear from the others about how they're looking at supporting the sustainability of locally led organizations.
Perfect. So the online question was actually similar to Louis' question on, what are you doing to get your peers to get into this? So it's peer-to-peer accountability. So I'm going to request all the panelists to take the 1 minute to respond to the questions and close. This is a test of, communication. Sarah? Start.
So a test of communication, which is a good segue to your question about how can local partners help foster that communication and trust. And I think the key thing is to just recognize that we share the same goal. Like we all want this relationship to be successful. And that means, having this open door, having early and honest and frequent communication. And problems shouldn't be a concern. They should be an opportunity to talk through and find a way forward rather than something that is, either withheld or thought to be, a real challenge to that relationship. All relationships have complications. And so I think that the more we're open about those and can talk through them, I think then that is the best. And then supporting the sustainability of local organizations, I think that is a really great question. One of the things that we are really focused on at USAID is thinking about indirect cost recovery for organizations. We do work in a very project-based way, and we cover the costs of implementing a project, but it's also imperative to be able to cover the costs of an organizational's sort of health and operational strength as well. And so we are taking steps to ensure that we are doing that in a better way, and we are happy to have new regulations that allow us to increase the amount of indirect costs that we're able to support for local organizations as well.
Thank you. Tara?
Sure. So I think building on what Sarah said, I think communication is really key to, Lewis, what you had mentioned about how do we address the gap. And I think part of that for us as donors is the responsibility to be present, to be able to have that conversation in the countries that we're working with, the organizations that we want to work with. And I think the absence of that makes building that trust really difficult. On the question about what the UK is specifically doing, I'll give one example, which is the Grand Bargain, which was launched in 2016, where we made a commitment around channeling 25% of our assistance to humanitarian funding as directly as possible to local actors. So that's like one tangible commitment that we have made and a specific number and target attached to that.
Thank you. Birgitta?
Yes, I think how do we expand lessons learned? We as Denmark took some time and tried to chair a group under the Grand Bargain on exactly local leadership. So that's at least a way, and I think these type of forums are really important to play into. Second one, how do we trust and so on and so forth. What we try to do and what I can see the results of, we have developed a concept for these strategic partnership agreements with civil society organizations that are 4 years. We're even looking at it, expanding it to 5 years. So that creates some core funding, flexible funding for civil society organizations, which gives, a kind of the space that is needed to work. And I can see this principle of 2080 that I discussed before is also having an impact. These things are not easy. I'm not saying that but I think sometimes we have to make these things happen. We have to take these kind of very clear decisions that will actually, have a clear impact. Like I can see the 2080 principle. Thank you.
Shaheen.
Yeah, I'd start by slightly backtracking to the last one. I don't think there's a dichotomy here. I think it's not appropriate to think of different accountabilities for different audiences. We're all looking for the same, which is the most impact for where it matters the most. And so coming together around that, I think creating an evidence, I think a lot of what has moved this is we all feel, I'm sure all of us agree, that it's the right thing to do, but where's the evidence for that? And so one of the things that we're looking to invest in is a transparent, accessible evidence library. Where does it reside? What's the governance structure? All things that need to be worked out. And in fact, we're working with USAID on this through the MOU we signed with them so that it would be publicly accessible. So I think doing practical things like that. On the piece about trust, I think it's back to the time question, it's back to the showing up question. I think we've heard what we all need to do, and I think it's how do we practically address those when there are constraints.
Thank you, Kim.
Yeah, on the donor coordination piece, I think there is a lot happening, and the pledge really pushed that in a very positive direction. And the Council on Foundations is organizing several global foundations around the commitments in the pledge. There's also separate groups meeting around work in Africa, work in Asia, right? So there's a lot of coordination happening. I think that's positive. We need to continue that. I agree that, there shouldn't be this dichotomy. And when you think about humanitarian work, development work, social justice work, we're all trying to achieve the same thing, and we're all talking about localization, but there are not that many spaces that bring those funders together. So I think that's where we can perhaps improve. And then I just want to close that I think we'd also be remiss without acknowledging kind of the structural inequality of the world economy that sort of brings us to this place, and the global financial architecture that governs the economy, and particularly the unsustainable debt burden of majority world countries. And really, of course, locally led development is very important in this whole process, but I think we also have to think about kind of the bigger systemic structures and work on both at the same time.
Thanks, Kim. Elizabeth.
No, thank you. Just a few thoughts based on the questions and some of the very good points already from the other panelists. In terms of expanding lessons learned, this is something we feel very strongly about as well, and also about trying to identify and better communicate impact, why it's important that we do what we do and how we do it. So in an effort to respond to those very important challenges, last year, the PBSO with other UN partners and partners beyond the UN, we launched what we're calling a Peacebuilding Impact Hub, and we're trying to work together precisely to evaluate and look quantitatively and qualitatively at what we can learn about what we've achieved, what works, what doesn't. And someone mentioned also at one point the bad lessons, and not just to showcase the good. And we think that will hopefully remind everyone how important it is to invest in sustainable peace and sustainable development, but also be a great learning vehicle for all of us. Secondly, in terms of supporting sustainability of local organizations. This is something that I think about all the time, the sustainability of our efforts. The SG's Peacebuilding Fund is supposed to be a catalytic fund. So we come in with seed money for an initial support to very important activities and actors. We have small grants facilities for some local CSOs, such as in the Lake Chad Basin area in Africa. But what happens when that ends, it dries up? We need to, I think, all to work much more on sustainable approaches to local development, because when we withdraw, what happens after that? And one of the kind of glimmers of hope on that is volunteerism, and looking at how that might help also at the local level. But sustainability is key. And finally, how can local partners help in terms of trust and challenges that we have before us? I would say, number one, be patient with us, and number two, be honest with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And on that note, I am going to hand it over to Vahime Hirkun, who is the Managing Director of Peace Direct in the US, to close us out.
Thank you. So I've been given the daunting task of having to synthesize such a rich conversation we've been having today. But first, on behalf of Peace Direct, the Movement for Community-Led Development, NEAR, Civicus, and WINGS, I really want to thank the Ford Foundation for allowing us into this space for this vital discussion. I also want to thank the Conrad N. Hilton Foundation for supporting such efforts to bring key voices and experiences to the discussion we had. And then finally, I want to thank all of the panelists in both panels, as well as all of the participants here and online for joining us. Our goal was to create a space for an honest dialogue, to hold each other to account on the commitments we had made, and the practices we seek to improve, the lessons we've learned along the way, and continue moving from there. So some of the key takeaways that I've distilled from the conversations that we've had, and also on the post-it notes that we've had on the board, so clear through line from everyone's positions on this, is that trust, patience, and co-creation are essential for meaningful implementation of the locally led agenda. Reimagining how we work and decentralizing power, whether that's through funding models, dialogue and expertise, language, and other aspects of the entire ecosystem. Accountability in this new way of doing and thinking cannot just live at the headquarters, but it must reach all actors that are involved. And finally, transparency is how progress is being made, and also where failures are happening, because failures are a rich source of learning. And before everyone leaves, I do encourage everyone to take a look at the post-it notes. There is such incredible expertise here in the room and those online to continue looking at the mural board. So many of these key takeaways today did center around the values of trust, honesty, and partnership. The path to actualizing these commitments and principles to the locally led agenda is complex, but as we all know, anything worth doing is always challenging. Luckily, as we all are here today, we're not alone. The champions of this agenda, whether they're in donor organizations, UN agencies, or civil society, are important to driving forward the commitments we've discussed today. They are the ones ensuring that the locally led agenda is not a concept that we just talk about, but actually approach and practice actively. I encourage all of us to reflect on how we can support these champions and become champions ourselves, working within our own institutions and together to create lasting change. And finally, before we do close, I do want to plug another UN side event that is happening at the General Assembly, hosted by WINGS and together with Alianza del Fundos del Sur, Global Fund for Community Foundations, and Giving Tuesday are hosting an event on Monday to look at another critical piece of the locally led agenda, a conversation to look at the need to strengthen local philanthropy and giving ecosystems to ensure development is not only locally led, but as much as possible locally resourced. They will share evidence and data illustrating how community funds, other forms of philanthropy, and giving infrastructures can play a critical role in supporting social movements and bottom-up, locally owned social change. Thank you all for coming today.